What if what you call reality isn't what's actually happening, but rather the way you've been trained to observe what happens? Is there something in your life that keeps repeating itself? A pattern that returns in disguise, even when you think you've evolved, understood, forgiven? Maybe what keeps this cycle going isn't the content but the lens. We live trapped in a kind of invisible enchantment. We believe we're reacting to the world, when in truth we're merely reproducing the same perspective. Like a mirror that only reflects what's already in front of it, your reality doesn't invent anything. It echoes. The observer effect, that term so many have heard and linked to quantum physics, isn't a distant concept. It's intimate. It shows up every time you react without realizing. Every time you feel that something out there is blocking you, when in fact, it's an old internal frequency that still inhabits you. The observer changes the outcome, not because they think differently, but because they feel differently, because they let go of resistance, because they stop looking through trauma, through fear, through urgency. They begin to look with presence, and that's what collapses a new reality. The universe doesn't respond to what you want. It responds to your vibration at the moment you observe. If your gaze still carries the past, the future cannot come near. Krishnamurti said, "Observation without judgment is the highest form of human intelligence, and perhaps also the quietest form of healing. Because the moment you truly observe, something unravels. The illusion dissolves. Reality no longer needs to scream, and that's when everything changes, not because you forced it, but because you stopped repeating. The observer effect is not in the world, it's in your inner mirror, and the reflection always obeys the state of the one who observes. There is something subtle that escapes most people. It's not the world that comes to you, it's your consciousness that shapes it as you observe. Even before the scene unfolds, there is a field, an invisible, vibrational, psychic field, that prepares the way you will perceive what's about to come. The name for this isn't miracle nor chance, it's resonance. The universe doesn't project random images. It organizes patterns, patterns that are born from your inner frequency, your recurring emotional state, your beliefs that live below the line of consciousness. If there's a blind spot in you that still expects rejection, it won't matter what someone else says. Something in your gaze will translate it as if you're being discarded. The world isn't rejecting you. It's you who's still observing from the wound. When we speak of the observer effect, many think it's only about influencing particles in a lab. But reality isn't made of particles alone. It's made of presence. And presence isn't what you think. It's what you vibrate while you think, while you feel, while you observe. When you walk into a space already expecting to be attacked, you unconsciously armor yourself. And when you do, your vibration becomes rigid. And when your vibration hardens, the field responds with friction. The other person isn't responding to you. They're responding to your field. The friction you feel out there is often the reverberation of resistance you didn't notice within. What if everything you call reality is just a stage that responds to your posture as a spectator? What if every word you hear is being shaped by the emotional place from which you listen? There is a silent language at play before speech ever begins. It's your vibrational field. It says everything your mouth can't express. And it dictates everything the world seems to show you. What you expect from the world says a lot about the frequency you're emitting without realizing it. And that emission comes from memories, pain, past experiences that still live in you as if they're happening now, as if they've never passed. Because time at this level isn't linear, it's vibrational. The past that hasn't been digested becomes a filter, and the filter is the observer. Carl Jung said that everything unconscious in us ends up manifesting in the world as fate. And fate, seen this way, is less of a path and more of a reflection. If you still see yourself as needy, alone, excluded, the world can't truly offer you belonging, because you can't see it, because you're trapped in an old lens that still needs to be dissolved, not through effort, but through awareness. It's not about compulsively changing your thoughts, nor about affirming things you don't truly feel. It's about noticing where you're observing from, where you're reacting from. What is the origin of your gaze? Does it come from trauma or presence, from lack or from wholeness, from urgency or from trust? What changes your reality is not what you wish for with words. It's the state of being you sustain when the world doesn't respond the way you hoped. This is the true alchemy of observation. when you manage to stay centered, even when everything around you tries to pull you back to the old pattern, when you choose to see what's in front of you without the veil of pain, when you don't interpret another's silence as abandonment, nor waiting as punishment, when you remain whole, even if the world is falling apart. In that moment, something invisible realigns, not because you asked, but because you aligned. Reality doesn't change through effort. It bows to your silence. And that silence is not the absence of action, it's vibrational presence. It's the end of automatic reaction. It's the birth of a new observer within you, one who's no longer trying to fix the world, because they understood it was their own gaze that needed healing. And here, something profound is revealed. It's not the world that delays you. It's your unconscious repetition of what the world is. The true observer effect is realizing you've never really seen the world as it is. You've always seen the world as you feel, and when that changes, everything changes. Because reality can finally stop repeating what you no longer need to live. There is a kind of suffering that repeats itself in silence, the frustration of expecting something new while still observing with the same old eyes. The mind says it wants change, but the body still vibrates fear. The soul longs for freedom, but the heart is still trapped in the desire to control. And what's born of this is a cycle where nothing truly changes, because the observer remains the same. There's a subtle trap in expectations. When you project an ideal image of what should happen, you unknowingly push reality away from what it is. Expectation isn't born from the now, it's born from a memory, from a desire to fix the past, to compensate for what wasn't. And behind it, there's always a wound that still dictates how you see life. Expecting something specific from someone is a disguised way of repeating the pattern. You don't see the other as they are. You see what you expect of them. And when they don't match that, you confirm the old pain. No one understands me. I'm always rejected. Nothing ever works out for me. But the other person often did nothing wrong. They just didn't fit into your projection. And the pain you feel isn't new. It's recycled. Expectation is an anxious lens. It contaminates the present with the weight of an unlived future, and it prevents the now from revealing itself as it truly is. Every time you cling to an outcome, you're trying to control what should be spontaneous, and what is forced doesn't flow. The vibration of expectation is the vibration of lack. It says, this is still missing, and the universe doesn't deliver fullness where the field screams lack. On the vibrational level, everything is information. And expectation sends a clear message. You don't trust. You don't trust the flow, the timing, or yourself. And when trust is lost, the field closes. The flow stops, and reality collapses. Not the quantum collapse of creation, but the collapse of repetition, because the new doesn't enter a house that only wants to repeat the past with a different name. There is a space between desire and control. It is the space of surrender. And it's not about giving up. Surrender isn't abandoning your wanting. It's letting go of the form. It's allowing life to surprise you in ways the mind doesn't yet know. It's observing without tension, being fully present without demanding the moment to match an inner script. Maybe that's why so many people feel exhausted, not because of what they live, but because of the constant effort to force life to fit an idea. But life is not an idea. It's a fluid intelligence that responds to the vibration of the now. And the now only reveals itself when the observer silences control. Thoth said, "The mind that seeks to control all things loses access to the invisible. The invisible is where creation begins. It's where frequencies organize. It's where realities prepare to be born. But this field only responds to neutrality, to non-effort, to the state in which you vibrate presence without trying to pull toward you what is not yet ready. You can want, you can imagine, you can dream, but if your field is contaminated by the rigidity of expectation, reality won't flow, because it doesn't move by force. It moves by coherence, and coherence is when your wanting doesn't conflict with your feeling, when desire doesn't come from lack but from wholeness, when the intention is not to escape pain but to express your truth. As long as you observe with urgency, time seems to drag, but when you observe with ease, time dissolves. And what once felt far away arrives effortlessly, because it's not the distance that prevents, it's the tension in your field. And tension is born from fear, the fear of not receiving, of not being seen, of not being enough. But this fear isn't from now. It lives in you as an echo, an old program that still dictates how you wait, how you react, how you protect yourself. Letting go of expectation is allowing life to speak, letting the universe respond without being interrupted by your anxiety. And when that happens, something reorganizes, not outside but within, because the true observer effect isn't about creating an ideal future. It's about freeing yourself from the lens that distorts the now. And when that lens falls away, what arrives is not what you wanted, it's what you needed. There comes a moment when you begin to suspect that what keeps repeating in your life doesn't come from the outside. That no matter how many paths you try, how many people you involve, how many methods you use, the pattern returns. And it doesn't return because the world is cruel. It returns because your lens is still in the same place, because something in you still vibrates as it did before, because the observer is still the same. This repetition is not punishment, it's revelation. It's as if the universe is waiting for you to realize that what keeps hurting is not the fact, but the form. The way you interpret, react, anticipate, block, the way your story still spills over the edges of your presence. And as long as that story dominates your gaze, reality doesn't change, because reality responds to the field, not to desire. And your field doesn't lie. There is deep intelligence in cycles. They don't exist to punish you, but to remind you where you are still stuck. And being stuck doesn't always mean being immobilized. Many times it means being in constant motion, but in circles, like someone running inside a labyrinth thinking they're moving forward, when in reality they're just bumping into inner walls they haven't yet recognized. These walls have names: self-sabotage, guilt, attachment, fear of losing, fear of opening up. But the name matters less than the vibration. What sustains these patterns is the unconscious frequency you emit every time you are not present, and the absence of presence is where repetition lives. Because the new can only enter when there is space, and space only opens when awareness touches the blind spot. Many people confuse effort with transformation. They think the harder they fight, the faster they'll escape the cycle. But life doesn't respond to force, it responds to clarity. And clarity is not about understanding mentally, it's about feeling with neutrality. When you look at an old pattern without identifying with it, something begins to dissolve, because you no longer feed it. You don't judge, you simply observe. And there, in the act of observing with presence, the end of repetition is born. It's at this point that the observer effect reveals itself as a portal, not a portal to escape reality, but to reframe it. What you call reality may just be a sequence of unintegrated memories, and until you recognize them, they repeat, not as punishment, but as a reminder of where your consciousness needs to rest. Physics speaks of quantum collapse, but in the realm of the soul, this collapse happens when the old gaze gives way to a new state of being, when you stop waiting for the world to set you free and begin to realize that the prison was in the way you were reading the signs. The signs were always there, but you only see what you're ready to see, and sometimes it takes going through discomfort until the veil falls. Jung said that the unconscious runs your life, and you call it fate. But fate can be rewritten the moment consciousness touches what was once shadow, because where there is light, the pattern cannot survive. It reveals itself, and in revealing itself, it loses power, because it no longer controls you from behind the veil. You see it, and whoever sees, chooses. You can keep trying to control life with mental strategies, or you can begin to observe yourself with the honesty of someone who is tired of suffering without knowing why. That honesty hurts, but it is liberating, because in it you recognize yourself as the source, and the source needs no guarantees. It simply emanates, vibrates, feels, observes, and creates. The pattern doesn't break by willpower, it dissolves when the vibration changes, and the vibration changes when the observer awakens. When they stop confusing themselves with the mind's content, when they stop identifying with the story, and finally begin to observe with presence. That's the point where repetition unravels. Not because you fought it, but because you no longer vibrate the frequency that sustained it, and the universe silently responds. Reality, no matter how dense it may seem, is a field in constant malleability. Nothing in it is fixed. What appears solid is merely a frequency that has repeated enough to take form. And that's why most people believe they are trapped by what they see. But what is seen is only the vibrational reflection of what is sustained within. Change the observer, and the reflection no longer has a foundation to remain the same. There is a silent turning point in the journey of those who awaken, when you begin to realize that you are not reacting to the world, you are reacting to your own memories. New situations trigger old wounds, and without noticing, you respond not to the present, but to an echo. That echo vibrates in you as an emotional truth, and until you observe it from a new place, it continues to determine how reality unfolds before you. The observer effect doesn't occur when you decide to think positively. It occurs when your internal state aligns with the truth of the now. Thinking is mental, observing is vibrational, and the universe responds to vibration. If your mind says everything is fine, but your field says I'm still afraid, it's fear that manifests, because it's the one carrying the active frequency. But what if, for a moment, you stopped trying to change what you feel and simply looked at it with sincerity? What if discomfort wasn't a mistake, but an invitation? A reminder that something inside you is still beating out of sync with the present. Presence doesn't judge, it doesn't resist, it embraces. And in that embracing, patterns dissolve without struggle. True transformation happens when you allow feeling to rise to the surface without rejection. When you no longer try to rush back to the ideal frequency, because that rush is in itself an escape. Healing is not about fleeing from pain. It's about looking at it with the kind of attention it never received. Conscious observation is that attention. It is not passive, it is alchemical, because when you become fully present with what is, without trying to change it, you have already begun to change. And then the world begins to respond differently. People act differently. Time reorganizes. Situations seem to adjust, almost as if by synchronicity. But it's not magic. It's vibrational correspondence. The external reality merely reflects the new center you've begun to sustain. A center that no longer needs to prove anything, resist anything, or hide anything. A center that is complete in its own clarity. You don't need to struggle to manifest something new. You simply need to become the space where the new can exist. That requires presence, and presence requires silence. A kind of silence that is not the absence of sound, but the absence of judgment. When you observe without identifying, you release. And by releasing, you allow the universe to reorganize what was stuck. It's in this field that quantum collapse gains inner meaning, not as a technical concept, but as a living experience. The collapse happens when the energy of the old pattern no longer finds support in your state of being. It dissolves, because it no longer finds in you the same automatic response. And reality, like a mirror without a past, begins to reflect a different image, an image born from the now, not from what was. Presence is the only force capable of interrupting repetition, because it cuts the cycle exactly where it feeds, in unconsciousness. Everything that repeats without your awareness continues, but everything that is seen with awareness transforms. Because awareness is creative, it is alive, it is magnetic. It does not fight against reality, it transmutes it by vibrating a new frequency. You are not trapped, you are repeating. And what sustains repetition is the absence of presence. When the observer awakens, the pattern loses its nourishment. And when that happens, there is no effort. There is release. There is flow. There is space for the new to emerge, not as something you chase, but as something you begin to allow. The world you live in responds to your center. And when your center changes, the world spins differently. Because it has no choice. It is, and always has been, the reflection of your vibration. Sometimes life seems to go on pause. Nothing flows, nothing responds. Time drags. And no matter how much you try to provoke movement, everything remains still, as if the universe had forgotten your existence. It's in these moments that many give up, fall into apathy, or return to old patterns, because at least there is familiarity. But what almost no one realizes is that the void is not the absence of response. It is the silence of transition. Reality hasn't stopped. The mirror is just waiting for a new observer. There is a deep intelligence in this apparent silence. It is not punishment. It is the necessary pause for the old reflection to dissolve. Because as long as you still see yourself as who you have always been, reality must repeat. It has no choice. The universe does not act based on morality, merit, or judgment. It acts by resonance. The projected image is always a consequence of the center you inhabit, and when the center dissolves, when old inner structures begin to collapse, there is a gap between what no longer is and what has not yet arrived. This gap is uncomfortable, but also sacred, because there, in not knowing, in not controlling, arises the rarest opportunity to look at yourself without armor, without certainties, without haste, just being with what is, exactly as it is. The mirror begins to reflect differently when the observer abandons the need to be seen in a certain way, when they stop seeking validation in the reflection, when they accept that the external image was never the origin, it was always the effect. And it is at this point that something silent takes shape, not as a quick answer but as a shift in axis. All true transformation is born in the invisible. Before anything happens outside, the field needs to rearrange itself within. And this rearrangement doesn't happen through effort, nor through endless affirmations. It happens the moment you stop running from yourself, when you stop resisting what you feel, when you look with such presence that what was hidden begins to dissolve without force. Presence deactivates the cycle because it no longer feeds the old, and what is not fed disappears, not by rejection, but by vibrational maturity. The pain that once guided your choices no longer finds an echo. The urgency that dictated your steps loses strength. The fear that paralyzed you no longer screams as loud, and the mirror responds, but not with what you wanted, with what you have become capable of sustaining. It is common to feel that after making this internal shift, reality should immediately return signs. But the field does not respond to chronological time, it responds to vibrational consistency. And consistency is not rigidity, it is surrender. It is when you sustain the new frequency even without immediate return, when you remain present even in the absence of guarantees, when you stop observing in search of a result and begin to observe out of integrity. This is the true leap, leaving the place where reality is a commodity that must prove something to you, and entering the state where it is an extension of your consciousness. When you inhabit this space, the world no longer needs convincing. It bends. Not out of obedience, but out of coherence. It aligns because there is no longer contradiction between what you feel, think, and vibrate. Perhaps the greatest challenge is this: to trust the invisible when everything around seems still. But it is in this silence that the field is reconfigured. It is in this not knowing that the old collapses. It is in this in-between space that the new approaches, not as a conquest, but as a natural consequence of an observer who has changed. Reality does not move ahead of your state. It follows it. It forms in exact measure to your vibration. And if today everything seems suspended, without direction, maybe it's because the mirror is on hold, waiting for your new gaze, for your new center, for your silent decision to stop repeating. And that decision is not a shout, it is an inner whisper, almost imperceptible, but absolutely transformative. When you truly align, there is no longer a need to cry out for an answer, because reality itself becomes the answer. It doesn't arrive as proof, but as a reflection. And in that reflection, you recognize yourself, not as the one who waits, but as the one who is. And the mirror finally reflects something new. Perhaps reality was never the problem. Perhaps it was only waiting for your gaze to stop repeating what no longer serves. The observer effect is not in the things you try to change, but in the vibration with which you observe them. Nothing outside needs to move. It's enough for your center to reposition itself. Life does not respond to what you wish for in haste. It responds to what you sustain in silence. And when your silence becomes presence, the world has no choice. It reorganizes. If something here resonated within your field, write in the comments, "I am the new observer." That way I'll know you made it to the end with an awakened heart.